Do a clap for audio sync for my backup audio thing. All right, everybody. Today we have a treat. I am here live with Willie Cade to discuss the John Deere lawsuit. So, as you may have heard, a lot of farmers have gotten together and decided to do a class action lawsuit against John Deere. And Willie has actually read through the entire 30-plus pages of this lawsuit and meticulously gone through every single area where he thinks there may be a question or a concern. And I thought we'd go through it together. So, thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, Louis. And by the way, there's not just one, there's now 2 lawsuits, and we know that there are more coming.
So one of them, I honestly forget the states that they were. I believe one of them is in Illinois, and the other one was in Alabama or Arizona.
Alabama.
Right. Like
Right.
I shouldn't get my states wrong like that. That's insulting. But okay, so what do you think is the most important part to start off with here? I mean, I personally was just so impressed at the concept of there even being a small chance of there being an actual jury trial for John Deere, because I mean the concept of this story making its way to where 12 normal, average, everyday people get to decide what happens, I can only imagine that being a complete nightmare for John Deere.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And kind of I'm going to riff a little bit off of what you did here. You started at the last page of the filing, and I'm going to kind of go in reverse order too. And I want to talk about the 10 counts or the 10 accusations that they made, because the video that you did on the lawsuit a couple of days ago is pretty good about the preamble stuff. So let's start with count number 1, which is conspiracy in restraint of its trade. In other words, what's being asserted here in this document is that because of the way they have engineered their products, they, John Deere, have the ability to control who gets to do what in the trade in purchasing. And that is clearly a violation of law, long-standing law. The Clayton Act and the Sherman Act were in the 1800s. I mean, this is bedrock law that we're talking about here, that they're being accused of. And the thing that's amazing to me is that when you talk to people who work for John Deere, they are clueless that they're breaking the law.
I kind of wonder if that's by design.
I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, okay? And I'm thinking it's such a cultural, we're John Deere and we're flawless and we make everything perfectly. We certainly wouldn't, our lawyers certainly wouldn't let us be doing anything that is illegal. And I got to tell you, somebody somewhere is going to start to wake up and they're going to go, wait a minute, we're in trouble here. Okay, so let me go on to the second one. And what I call the second one is called it. The second count of the filing is called a group boycott. In other words, it's taking a whole class of businesses or people and not letting them participate in the economy. And that happens to be, well, whether it's an independent farmer or whether it's an independent repair shop. I mean, I have some great relationships with some independent repair shops. And I got to tell you, those guys hustle. I mean, they work really hard and they are figuring out all the kinds of ways that they can really compete with Deere. And given kind of the ball and chain they have to drag of not being able to use payload files from John Deere, they're pretty creative in what they can do. So, for example, they can take a particular piece that's a chromed piece on a steering wheel. They can actually take out the chrome piece, get it re-chromed down the street at their local shop friend, bring it, install it back in, and maybe it's a $2,000 repair. Whereas if you go to the John Deere dealer, they'd have to replace that part and they'll charge $6,800. I mean, the differential, and if you will, we were talking a little bit before we started, Lewis. That is what is known as rent or monopolized chart prices on that. Rent is an economic term that is used for the monopoly pricing that John Deere can get away with.
Yeah, because one of the things we were discussing is when they were seeking specific damages or relief. One of the things that I was saying in my video is that I'll have customers that walk in that literally give me a hug when I fix their board for $300, and there are other people that even if we say if it's just to replace this one piece, $50, they will look at me and say rip off and walk out the door. So it's really difficult to try and figure out what is a rip off if you're going to seek legal relief in terms of saying this is where I was screwed and how, because it's such a subjective matter. So how would you go about doing that in this case? So for instance, like when they have a dealer tech where they say they're getting $125 or $150 an hour to come out and work on somebody's tractor because they need to plug a laptop in that has a piece of software that they don't have access to reactivate something. How do you figure out what part of that constitutes a ripoff? Because from my point of view, again, I'm not saying that it's right that they force them to do that, but like $125 an hour, if you have somebody who is an expert in their field, who is going to be traveling, doing a house call with knowledge and everything, that's like it's difficult for me to make the argument, to figure out how you make the argument as to where the ripoff is. Is the ripoff in the price, or is the ripoff in the fact that you needed that person to come out in the first place, where the entirety of the labor is considered what you would want relief from?
Yeah, I'm gonna defer on that and say that's the job of economic experts in this particular equation. My suspicion is that the rate of $150 to $160 an hour for technical expertise is certainly well fixed in the industry. I think where they're really going to get hammered in this is that they're going to say that they're requiring their service people to travel and they're charging for the travel and those kinds of things. But I'm going to leave that be. And by the way, if I find out details, I'll come back to you and tell you.
So one thing you said in here is when you highlighted when they say same software and repair tools that they have, you said that the dealerships have. You said it's an error in the filing because it doesn't properly explain the mechanism of control. It assumes that the dealer has the tools necessary to generate payload files. So what specifically are they getting wrong there? Because when they go to the dealer can do a certain repair that they may not be able to.
Well, what happens is the dealer, when they need a new payload file, can't generate it because John Deere hasn't given them the technology to generate the software necessary to do that. What the dealer has to do is has to make a request of John Deere to create it, the corporate entity. They go and do their magic, and then they wrap it up in this encrypted file so you can't see it. And then the software that John Deere has provided the dealer technicians translates that on the laptop and then puts it into the equipment. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say that the dealer can do it when they actually can't. And why that is important in this particular filing is that is the John Deere engaging someone else in an illegal act. And that's what's known as RICO, or Racketeering, Influence, Corrupt Organizations. And you'll see some vague references to triple damages in these filings. And that's really what would allow triple damages, is that if it was prosecuted under RICO statutes. And by the way, remember, RICO statutes were developed to fight the mafia. And I'm guessing there's a whole bunch of people right now that are going, yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. It sure seems like John Deere is being a corrupt organization and racketeering using their dealers.
Now, when you say this is the type of statute that would be used to fight the mafia, the reason that I find that I want to hone in on that a little bit, even though this is separate from this particular lawsuit, there are certain organizations that I've been dealing back and forth with as we lobby for right to repair bills in different states, and it was very surprising to me to hear certain organizations that tend to represent farmers say we want to be left out of particular pieces of legislation. And what's interesting to me is the language that they use when explaining why they want to be left out. It sounds less like something that's real, and it sounds to me, and this is to be clear, completely conspiratorial here, so that I'm not stating this as like I know, but it sounds like somebody has a gun to their head and is saying, say something that is not true. It would be like if I were to say, I don't want this repair bill to be passed. Apple independent repair shops don't have any problems when it comes to not getting parts or tools. They're just really bad at doing repairs. You would either assume that either A, I had a briefcase, of $20 million on my desk in cash that somebody handed me, or B, that somebody had a gun to my head. Can you kind of explain what some of the internal politics are like at some of these organizations that represent farmers and how this may contribute in any way, shape, or form to legislation really not moving forward over the past 5 to 6 years, even after some of these organizations vote 176-1 in favor of moving forward?
Lewis, you're asking too many questions
I
at
know.
once. Hold on. So,
Sorry.
first of all, there's two questions that I heard in there. One is,
I'm a horrible interviewer. My apologies.
No, it's okay. You've got one question about, hey, how come these guys aren't representing the farmers? Number one. And number two is, oh shoot, I forgot it. We'll come back to it. So let me talk about these organizations. Now, I have enormous compassion for these organizations for two reasons. One is they are in a bind because they need John Deere's money to run their organizations. Now, everybody can argue whether they should be in that position or not. I'm not gonna talk about it, but I think it's a real issue. Is a real issue for them. But more importantly, they also understand how much John Deere is a bully in the industry. And when you're out there representing your farmers, of which, by the way, 98% of the almost 2 million farms in the US are family operations, those farmers can get picked off by John Deere, and they're your members and you're trying to protect them. So I have great compassion for them. And as a matter of fact, I want to chide you for that last video when you talked about that. So a little pushback on you there. Okay. So I have great compassion for them. I know that they're working the issue really hard and they really do want to get it through. Now, the second issue that you're talking about that I just remembered was, how come we can't get this through the legislatures? This seems like a friggin' obvious thing. And the votes that have come out, 75% of the people in favor. Well, I think in our society, we have created an environment where what we think is, if it's good for a company, it's good. And I want to start to attack that concept. I'm saying is there are some things that corporations do that aren't good for our economy, like this particular issue of right to repair. Now, is that to say that I want to destroy John Deere and all that kind of stuff? No. I just want them to compete fairly under the given laws that exist within the United States and not flout them, which they are doing. They're actually flouting the laws.
Can you identify, because I'm not familiar with this, when you say that they are able to just pick off small farmers, what is the method that they could use to do that?
Yeah, and they're not doing it in front of everybody, but everybody around knows about it, and the fear level in the Midwest here is huge of John Deere these days.
Because there are certain farmers that I've spoken to that have said, I don't want my name ever included in anything publicly. I did not tell you this. That's happened enough times that I'm curious, what is the type of repercussion they could face if they spoke out publicly? Are we talking about their equipment no longer turning on? Are we talking about somebody showing up to their farm and, I don't know, like beating them, like roughing them up? Like what specifically is that? What specifically can they do? Because
they're a little more subtle than that.
I imagine. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So one of the things they can do is they can not use stuff. So we had a group of people who were having an event and they wanted to buy a John Deere product, and they went to their John Deere dealer like they normally had done for year after year after year. And the salesman said, no, we're not selling it to you because you support right to repair, period. Now, I was like, are you kidding me? Now,
Are we talking about? So sorry to interrupt you. Are you talking about the ability to purchase a new product, or the ability to purchase a part to repair their existing product, or both?
in this particular case, it was a brand new product.
Now does that is that simply because they've become used to and accustomed to this particular John Deere product that they would prefer to buy it, or is this a case where like that particular John Deere product is the only thing that does that particular thing due to some sort of monopoly? Because, like, for instance,
No. That's what they just wanted. They wanted to buy this and raffle it off for their event, and they wanted the prestige of a John Deere whatever to raffle off.
So it's kind of like brand loyalty.
Yeah.
Because the way I'm, because like if
No.
somebody's
Brand loyalty is one thing. We're talking about people talking about I bleed green because my grandfather and my grandfather's grandfather used green. And by the way, my dad worked for International Harvester for most of his career. He wouldn't talk about John Deere in the house. He'd talk about that place where they use a lot of green paint. Okay. And if you're a loyal Case IH customer, that place where they use a lot of red paint, and that's common vernacular out here in the Midwest. Yeah.
No, that's interesting because I mean, like the way I see it is if I were talking about right to repair to a reporter and like I were afraid that I don't know Samsung would no longer sell me a smartphone, rather than just say I don't want you to publish what I said, or I don't want anybody to know I said it, I would just say, yep, just publish it, and if they don't sell me a phone, just buy a Motorola. So it's just very interesting that the idea that
whoa, that's a really good point that you just made there. Number one is, and I'm going to go back to a question, so save that question for a minute. You talked about, well, how else could they do it? Well, we have a particular farmer who's documented that he lost $48,000 on a trade-in because he supported right to repair. And his dealer, because the dealerships are so well coordinated through John Deere, he can only deal with this one dealer. He lost $48,000 on an equipment trade-in. That's a real number that he's documented, that has gone through review by lawyers and all that kind of stuff.
So his ability to sell his equipment back to be able to purchase other equipment will be radically decreased, which causes him real financial harm because he spoke out against the king.
Exactly.
That's
real money there. Now, John Deere's going to say, oh, that's not us. That's the dealer. But I suggest because of the consolidations, John Deere is complicit in this because they made that environment possible. Okay. Oh man, there was another one there I was going to answer, but go ahead, keep going.
Okay. So let's see, going through you said that it was a moot point that Deere makes the full software only available to Deere dealerships and technicians who are not permitted by Deere to sell it. But that seems to be the crux of their entire complaint.
Well, I want to be careful here when we're diving down into the specifics of it, because I want the attorneys to have very precise language in these complaints. And frankly, when I read it, it seemed pretty sophomoric, and I'm using that as an insult to the attorneys. So I'm sorry, attorneys, but that's my opinion. And what's really happening here is that they are lying to their customers about when that software is needed and when it is not needed. Okay. By the way, you did a great review of the Bloomberg video that came out this week with Senator Tom Brandt of Nebraska. God, he's a real trooper for right to repair, especially in agriculture. And so I want to give him a lot of props for what he's doing on that one. But one of the things that the executive, the CTO of John Deere, Jamie Hinman, by the way, not the Jamie Hinman from Mythbusters, but Jamie Hinman smelled differently from John Deere, who's their CTO. This week in that interview, talked about how the equipment they make is a lot like airplanes, not like cars. And I'm going, are you kidding me? It's exactly like cars. They literally use the same standard for their electronic controls. And I have a friend who in the military was trained on servicing and maintaining airplanes. And today he works in a small manufacturer that makes farm equipment. He said, "Oh my God, it's night and day. Airplanes are terribly more complicated than farm equipment is." So that's another example, and kind of insidious. You've got this guy who's got this prestige of John Deere standing before the camera and doing a Bloomberg interview at their corporate headquarters. I know because I've been there. Saying, "Oh no, ours is much more complicated than that. And you poor dumb farmers can't at all understand how this works." So it drives me crazy, as you can tell.
I can tell.
Yeah. Now, by the way, when you look in those payload files, those secret files that are encrypted, what you see is almost, or it's analogous to what you see in the Windows registry. And Microsoft has got the Windows registry, has had it out there for decades. And has it created a world of problems? No. As a matter of fact, it's one of the solutions to the problems that Microsoft has had over time. And the example that I'll use is when we first started getting viruses on our computer, it wasn't Microsoft, the huge behemoth, that started to solve that problem. It was a small startup called Norton Utilities. And because they knew the ins and outs of the software of Windows, not the proprietary code, mind you, but the ins and outs, and they were able to work with it, we got solutions to viruses much sooner. And by the way, we need that kind of work today in agriculture. I've been carrying on. Sorry about that. You got me going there, Lewis.
But I think you have people that kind of are getting the ins and outs of this, and I think those are the people that are hacking this software in foreign countries and then making it available to farmers here so that they can.
Oh, wait! I want to clear that one up too. It's not hacking. What they're doing is gray marketing, and what I mean by gray marketing is in Europe, John Deere is required to provide this software to Europeans. And what's happening is Americans are buying that software overseas and bringing it to the US.
Is John Deere so not that I'm sure somebody that would have thought of this by now, but they don't have the idea to have I don't know, serial numbers in their tractors or something so that the European software only works with European serials and that the American software only works with an American serial? Because that just seems like something that Apple would have thought of 5 years ago.
Well, it's kind of interesting. And by the way, all of the arguments that John Deere makes that why they can't do it, they're already doing it in Europe.
And Europe seems to be considerably more restrictive than the United States when it comes to emissions in general, because what they say in the US is that this is going to be used to get around emissions regulations, but our emissions regulations are more lax than emissions regulations in a country where you're already giving your farmers access to all of this to begin with. So it's really difficult to kind of square that circle, unless you're saying that the United States is ahead of Europe when it comes to caring about climate change and emissions and everything like that, which is a really difficult argument to make. Particularly in a red state.
Well, and see, this is the thing that's so important here is as we dive deep into this kind of issues, we start to see where their arguments just fall away and fall apart. Now, it's so important that and where that really rubber meets the road is in these hearings and testimonies when you get 2 minutes to explain something. And what are we? 25 minutes into it, and we're barely scratching the surface here.
Yeah, and you
So
get 90 seconds before a little buzzer goes off, and then you're done. And the
yeah,
person that you're explaining it to is typically texting somebody.
yeah, and usually the proponents go first, and the opponents get the last word on this,
which is so frustrating.
So frustrating. But you got me going there again. Sorry, Liz.
No, it's you had said now in this suit they claim that John Deere control and the defendants, I should say, not John Deere, controlled all of the market for Deere repair services in the United States. And you said that's not true. Are you saying that's not true because you have independents that are able to do things even if they're not able to do everything, or because you have independents that are able to use this gray market software?
Both, actually. Yeah. So I want to make sure that when we're having this discussion, we're not doing it in a way that's got a lot of hyperbole around it, that it's real fact so that we can solve real problems for the farmers. Okay. And you're exactly right. Is they can independents can do a lot of things, but there are certain things, and it turns out to be the most expensive repairs that they can't end up doing. And that CTO guy from John Deere, is on video in an interview saying, well, 98% of the repairs actually being done, quote unquote, can be done. Well, that's just not true.
I agree with what you're saying on the hyperbole, because in one area it says if any one of these sensors throws an error code, the combine will enter limp mode, and you said too broad, likely inaccurate. And I had one case where somebody who worked for a John Deere dealership said, I actually support right to repair in what you're doing, but you said something in a video about a sensor. Watch, I'm going to show you what you could do with literally the software and everything that comes with your tractor. Look, I fixed it. I didn't have to go to, tell me in which part do you have to go to a dealer for this. And if this actually does make its way to a jury, the hyperbole is the point that could really bite them in the ass, because if they say something like that, and then they have somebody show up with a tractor and say, watch, they come onto a farm. Okay, this is what shows up with it. Here's my little Toshiba satellite from 10 years ago, my little old Windows XP laptop. I'm loading my software. Watch, look, see, I'm able to reset this. I don't actually need any of the dealer software. That's the type of thing that's going to confuse the jury. So I think it really is important that they take the complaints and make it very specific to the items where there's no dispute. Like with me, I'll always say, if I want to get a CD3217, watch, I am going I have a charging issue. Here's my specific charging issue. Here's my specific use case where I have Tim Cook by the balls. And I know with that use case that there is no way that they could get around it. I have emails to Texas Instruments and Intersil where they say they will not sell me this chip. I have them publicly saying that on their own Facebook page. I have all the proof of it. And there are certain things I could say where if I were to say I can't do any repair on this board because nothing's available, it would be easy for them to go, no, look, see, there's this, I don't know, this one TI chip that you can buy that shows up on this board on Mouser. So I agree with you that it's important to remove the hyperbole from it. Right. Now, is it too late to do that once this has been filed, or can they modify this once it actually does go to court?
Yeah, and all the lawyers that I've talked to recently with both of these filings and the other ones that are about to come, they all said, don't worry about it. We'll just alternate when it comes. And I'm going, yeah, but you're missing the essence. You're missing what really needs to be solved here. And so I'm a little bit worried that if we don't, as a community, really rise up and say, no, we want this done properly. And this is what needs to be solved. Not, some just throw some software at it and you got your $100 million for suing John Deere because they're such a huge company and they can afford the cash flow kind of thing.
What's the specific thing that you think is number one that needs to be solved here?
The number one thing that needs to be solved is payload files. We need to be able to either have access to it or be able to create them independent of John Deere. And and I need some little help on understanding and having this conversation. So I really want to invite your listeners to reach out to me. And is it okay if I give them my email address?
Yeah, sure. You're going to get a lot of spam and a lot of interesting stuff, but you're welcome. Go for it.
It doesn't matter. So it's a really easy email address. It's williecade@gmail.com. That's WILLIECADE @gmail.com. And stories, or, hey, Willie, this is a particular example of a problem that I have. And I want to kind of jump back to the whole payload thing and codes. So there are a series of codes in that are in the machines, and they're called latch codes, LATCH codes. And those particular codes do require a dealer to come out. And typically those latch codes are around the issue of emissions things. But here's the important thing to understand is a single code could be categorized as a latch code by John Deere after you've bought the equipment through an update. It's kind of like the Error 53 thing that Apple did with iPhones. They can, with an software upgrade, they can change the functionality and decisions that are being made. So it's important to really kind of get our feedback from people, and so we as a community, if you will, a group think on this, get the remedies that are really going to solve this problem.
Now, this ties back to one of the things that I heard from one of the people that was trying to backtrack us pushing forward a bill in one of the states. And this also goes back to your comment where you said in one of my recent videos I was a little too hard, or you wanted to chide me for it, but you didn't get around to chiding me. So I want to remind you so you have time to. So, okay, I believe I was a little harsh there, but the reason I thought that was warranted is when he used language that I just realized, like, if I show this sentence to any farmer in the country, they would probably punch me in the face. So I assumed some sort of either malicious intent there, or serious pressure being applied, whether in the form of positive pressure, as in money, or serious negative pressure, as in we are going to screw your constituents. So what is going on there, and where am I being unfair, if I am being unfair in any way, by pointing to this?
Well, and I'm fine. I love the way,
because I'm an asshole, so like I need to be chided from time to time.
By the way, I love the way you just let it rip. Let it go, Bubba. That's fine. And I'm a little bit of the same. But what's important here is to understand and have, in my mind, compassion for the people who are in those leadership positions. And they're looking at the entire landscape and trying to figure out how to maneuver this whole issue. And so I'm not saying you were wrong in what you ultimately meant, but that we've got to also take into consideration all the other elements that are going on for those people, and in a dialogue, see if what we can do is understand what their pressures are and what it is that they think they need to do, and work together to form a whole solution. And that's the difference for me. See, I don't want to get into a confrontation and you didn't do this and and all that kind of stuff, because that doesn't get us anywhere. And I think we see that way too often in our society right now.
Yes. That's an understatement.
Yeah, and one of my favorites of the lawsuits is count number 9 in the second lawsuit, and it's called promissory e-stopped. And I go, what the hell is an e-stopped? And basically it says, oh, they're lying. And it's like, oh, well, that's just the legal way to say, man, they're not telling the truth out there. So I'm really looking forward to.
This is where it said defendant made unambiguous promises through statements to plaintiff in the class that Deere tractors could be repaired through software tools and resources made available. And this is the part where, when journalists contacted them, they were just looking for one instance of this ever being made available. Can you provide us an example? So you've said this. We're not even going to dig into it. Just show us an example of this being true. And it was just crickets.
Right. Well, by the way, I made a request for customer level John Deere service advisor. I got a quote of $5,000 for the first year. But they never, I said, okay, great. Send me the order. And they said, we got to talk to John Deere first. I was like, what? Wait a minute. Here's my money. No, couldn't do it. So it's just, and I'm carrying on here, and it's like I don't care about John Deere, and they're wrong and they're bad, and I don't want to say that at all. I just want to say that I think what we've got going here in the U.S. is incredibly special. The way that it has been designed for 200 plus years now, and with the adaptations and changes that we've made, and I think if what we do is if we actually crack open this particular issue in agriculture, it will benefit so many people, and innovation will be so much broader and wider than if just one stodgy old company who's kind of stuck out along the Mississippi River in Moline is just the sole arbiter of what's happening. Now, that was pretty harsh. So that was kind of a Lewis comment there, I'm thinking.
I was speaking to somebody yesterday who was talking about the sheer amount of data, or from it's a certain amount. I forget if it was like measured in square miles or acres or something of farm data that John Deere has. And somebody said, "Well, how do they get it?" And they go, "Think like what? They're not sending mice into your fields to measure it. They don't have somebody that flies over with binoculars. They're getting it from your tractor." And you have access to it for a certain period of time, but you only have a certain period of time to access it, where that data can be accessed for longer periods by other people. And the concept, or the theory there, was that this would allow you to be able to better understand whether you wanted to lease or purchase a given piece of land based on data on how somebody else was able to perform on that land. And there have been people that have argued that that should be a completely separate company or a separate component from the part that does the purchase. I mean, that deals with the selling and also the repair of the equipment.
Oh my God, Lewis, oh my God, have we got another 3 hours here to talk about data?
It's Saturday.
Holy mackerel. So first of all, John Deere claims recently in an interview that they did with Swiss Bank on their investment side that John Deere has over 300 million acres of data on over 300 million acres. And if you look at how many, if all of that data was, and I don't think it is, but if it was, all of it was based in the US, that would mean that they have 94% of the harvested acres in the United States data. That's startling to me. Okay, absolutely startling to me. And even more importantly in this whole data equation is that 54% of the land that is harvested, crop harvested land, is not harvested by the guy who owns the land. It's either rented or leased. So the guy who's renting or leasing it is running his equipment over somebody else's land, and that all of that data is going to John Deere. Well, all of it that's in John Deere equipment. So it's like, holy mackerel, the guy who owns the land, by the way, the majority of land in the US doesn't have access to their data and can't get it. And John Deere doesn't have a mechanism to give it to them. I think that's a big problem. And that's one of the issues that we hope to solve in the upcoming Farm Bill.
It sounds very similar to what they're doing in the EU, where a website has to tell you if they're collecting certain data, and they also have to make available to you certain data if they've collected it from you. And people have advocated for that in America when it comes to companies like Google and Facebook and everybody else. And it seems like this is a very similar trend, and it's really interesting to see how that trend follows over, whether you're talking about using a cell phone, using a social media platform, or agriculture. That you have this one little trend, which is again, you're not able to fix what you own, and B, we are going to collect a lot of data from you, and C, you don't have access to the data that we have collected from you, but D, we are going to utilize that data in a manner that allows us to make money, allows others to make money, maybe off of your lands in the future, but you don't get access to it.
Right. And by the way, I'm going to go into great detail explanations on my channel, and it's called Deere Facts, and I'm promoting myself. But I hope that's okay, Lewis.
By all means, I'll have links down below to it.
Oh, great. So yeah, Deere Facts. And I'm going to go over in excruciating detail so that you can understand it. And what's important here about this is you and I all need to understand how the mechanisms work so that we can have that engaged conversation. And by the way, I gotta, I like my jokes, right, Lewis? Yeah. So, like, I'm not going to stand behind my grandfather's 31 patents on the manure spreader because I'm not standing behind a manure spreader. Yeah. And that's a good old classic Midwest joke. But and I like that I laugh at my own jokes. What can I tell you? Oh my God, I went off cue here. Oh well, forget it. Next time. Oh my gosh. So when you come to the Deere Facts, I will build a series of videos that you can do a deep dive on, and in 10, 15 minutes, get some real education on what the mechanisms that are being used to implement what seems to be, from these lawsuits, illegal activity.
What do you think the chances are of this lawsuit or the one that's going on in Alabama going anywhere?
Oh, unquestionable. It's going to go a very, very long way. And so the real question I think you're asking is will it ever get in front of a jury?
Yeah, that's the fun part, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I want to sit in the courtroom too. So
I want to see 12 people just make a decision on this, and I'm very curious. And like, if 12 people make the decision that John Deere is in the right, I want to see the case that they present that makes that true.
Right. And here's how we can increase the odds. And you're right, it's a gamble. But the way we can increase the odds is by having a technically more accurate and more accurate representation and testimony in the trial. Because if what we get is some real precision in this, and we can present it when the two sides sit down and start negotiating this, what's going to happen on the plaintiff side is they're going to go, hey, we got a case. We know we can win this case in court. We're good enough lawyers to do it. If it's just kind of a schlock job, John Deere can, give them a couple of $1 million and they'll walk away, and the lawyers will all be happy because they get a big payday. So what we really have to do here is not only these civil suits and these filings of class action suits, but we also need to get the regulators involved, whether it's the FTC, the SEC, the whole alphabet of organizations in Washington.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people's cynicism lies in I don't know, I have about 3 or 4 checks that I hang on my refrigerator with these little magnets where they'll say, like, Visa has wronged you in this way, or eBay has wronged you in this way. Here's 83 cents. Here's $1.85. And I don't cash these checks because it is literally not worth my time to find my phone, log into the banking app, get my 2-factor authentication code, click deposit, sign for a check that has 53 cents. Like,
well,
it's just worthless. And I think so many people are used to this, that if every farmer in America gets a check for $1.85 rather than there being real change, that they will have a reason to pick up an actual pitchfork because they own it.
Well, number one, I just got my Duracell class action lawsuit payment, but I got it through Venmo, which was actually kind of cool. It went directly into my Venmo account. So that was kind of fun. So there's a whole new way that this is going to be happening, but it's not going to be a couple of dollars for every farmer. This is going to be real money because we're talking about expensive repairs. The differential between a $2,000 repair and a $6,800 repair over 3 years. By the way, I would argue that it should be more than 3 years, but I may not get that opportunity. But over 3 years, over the entire 1,500 dealerships that have done repair for John Deere, that's going to be real money.
I hope so. And yeah, one of the things that was mentioned in there was that the sales of new devices in that Bloomberg piece went down, but repairs have continuously gone up, which is what has created this incentive structure. How is it that if you're selling less equipment that you're making more, that if you're selling less of an item, I would imagine that you would have less repair business because there's less overall of it out there. Like, how does that work?
Well, remember,
Economically.
this equipment is designed to last 20 or more years. So what they sold many, many years ago needs repair and parts and everything. So that's number one. Number two is part of the imprecision in those numbers as represented in particularly the lawsuit is that they conflate the idea of repair and parts with data sales. And without being able to go in and look in some detail through a discovery process, which is a legal process, is you won't know whether they're actually making the money on the parts and services, or is it more about they're now selling a lot of data to seed companies. And again, don't get me started on selling data and all that. We'll do a whole nother show on data, okay?
Yeah, because I learned a bunch of interesting stuff yesterday, and one of it was that there are certain federal regulations regarding collecting data on farms, which you're allowed to collect, and there are certain areas where John Deere is just flagrantly, completely ignoring it, from what I understand. And like, but that again, like the way the person who was explaining this to me took about 45 minutes to explain the intricacies of this one particular law, and admittedly, it didn't all stick in my head. But it was a very
Put it this way. I think I know who you were talking to, and it does take him 45 minutes to explain how to look up.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. But
That tends to be that tends to be a common trait of attorneys, I've noticed at this point in time.
Yeah.
I actually know too.
And that's part of what my work is try to take these incredibly technical details and translate it into a language where people like all of your listeners can kind of get. And I'm hoping I'm doing a good job. Tell me if I am. If I'm not, tell me that too.
Oh, you are. I wanted to take some questions from the audience if anybody here has anything here.
Oh,
So
great. I love questions.
Let's see if we get anything good.
Yeah.
Are the John Deere parts made in the U.S. or overseas?
A lot of John Deere parts are made overseas, but you got to remember most of the electronics John Deere doesn't make. They buy them from somebody else who does make it. And often they're identical parts that are used in the auto or truck industry. And what's so interesting about their arguments about, well, these are big machines, it'd be unsafe for people to have access to this. Well, tractor trailer trucks who are on the highway have very similar kinds of payload files. And those are publicly available and you can download them off of like Cummins Engines website. By the way, you can buy a John Deere piece of equipment with Cummins engine in it. So these are like literally in one area you can do it, in one area you can't because the company said you can't. So, but that gets me going. Sorry.
So what else are you looking for besides stories, feedback, or examples of problems with regards to payloads or codes?
Well, I mean, one of the things that my grandfather did a lot of was he went out and he visited farmers in their fields and he's asked them, what is the solution that you think should be happening? And so I really want people to come back with solutions. Like, if we did this, then that. And I don't want people saying, well, we just need the software, because that's not going to solve the problem. I want real solutions to it. And it's going to take some really give and take and conversations with people on how to do it. Now, by the way, one of the things that's really interesting that's going on these days is every once in a while we'll get communications from current John Deere employees. And they're saying, you go, Willie. Yay, keep going. And by the way, look over here. And so I happen to believe that those are the people who are really kind of listening to our arguments and going, yeah, you're right. Oh, ew. And I'm part of that organization. So we're going to get some really great inside information from people. I know this is going to drive John Deere crazy. but we are a free republic, and people have the right to talk. They don't have the right to divulge trade secrets, but they do have the right to talk. So
Would
it'll be fun.
repair prices drop with more repair folks, or would there simply be a more competitive grade? I don't know what competitive grade is.
Well, yes, John Deere can basically do what they want with their pricing because they don't have competition, and our country is built on the concept of competition. Our success in the US has been based on people competing. And by the way, I don't blame John Deere for not wanting to compete. I mean, they're just trying to satisfy their shareholders and say, and quarter after quarter have greater profits. And it's easier to do that if you're not having to compete with people, especially the smart, independent repair technicians. Or, by the way, most of the smart, independent repair technicians were once Deere dealer technicians, and they left and they're competing with their dealers. And if I was a dealer, yeah, I would want to not be able to support my former employee going out that I trained and, and all that kind of stuff on my dime and going out and doing his own business. I can see that as something that I would want, except it's un-American.
So, do these parts cost a lot to manufacture, or is it just general parts like brake pads?
Oh, the cost to manufacture question is a great question. And to honestly say we know the answer to that is just not true. I will suggest to you that given the relatively limited number of devices that John Deere sells, I think the number of combines that John Deere sold in North America in 2019 was something like 5,700. You can look it up on their website.
Yeah.
That's a small number of products to amortize all of this complex programming and everything over. So there are real prices in there. I mean, you alluded to it earlier, Lewis, when you talked about people complaining about my prices. They don't understand that I've got all this overhead. I've got, microscopes and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna berate them for what it costs them. I am gonna berate them for they don't want to. They're seemingly unwilling to be competitive.
Now, one person said, what is if there's so much trouble with John Deere products in a capitalistic society, why doesn't someone start a business that makes products that people love? Why hasn't that been done here? Like, my response when it comes to at least my industry is that you have a bunch of different companies that have been started and they all do the exact same thing. So, if you want to if you want to buy a smartphone where they'll hand you a schematic, I mean, Samsung won't, LG won't, Motorola won't, Apple won't, Fairphone won't give you a schematic. So literally, companies that were started on the premise of respecting right to repair won't even give you access to this. So, there is a high barrier to entry, and also all the people that exist in the market don't do it. I don't know what the market is like for tractors because I've never had to purchase one for my Brooklyn apartment. But what is keeping somebody from just starting a company that doesn't do this? And are there other companies that are more friendly than John Deere when it comes to repair?
Well, first of all, they've got a very loyal following they're eroding their goodwill on there, number one. So number two is it's a very high bar to get into and create a company that could compete. And also too is it takes decades for an individual farmer to turn over his entire fleet of equipment. Remember, it's not just a tractor. I need a tractor, I need a combine, I need a sprayer. There's a whole fleet of equipment. And John Deere, with this software, is starting to exclude other companies, whether they be full line manufacturers or short line manufacturers, in this software process. So they're starting to close the walls in this this walled garden. And so it's not like you can just walk down the street. I mean, it's not like, okay, I'm going to get a whole new fleet next year and I'm going to go over to Case. Well, oh, and by the way, Case is doing the same thing. AGCO is doing the same thing. Kubota is doing the same thing. So if everybody's doing it, you can, and that, represents a huge percentage of the market. It's not practicable.
So, what has materially changed in Nebraska since Tom Brandt has become senator? So, a lot of people are a fan of him. A lot of people like what he's done. But, like, what has changed since he beat out? I think it was Laura Epker or I forget the name. It was of the senator that he beat out.
Well, Tom, first of all, Tom's got guts, and I got to applaud him for he's just going for it, and the reason he's going for it is because he has personal experience as a farmer with this issue. He knows it intimately. Whereas, most legislators are like, what are we talking about? I don't understand. Yeah, it seems reasonable to me what John Deere is saying. And Tom has the insight and the knowledge and the experience to understand that what John Deere is saying is fluff. And in some cases not true, literally not true. In front of hearings of committees that Senator Brandt sits on, John Deere literally told a falsehood. And by the way, I wrote John Deere's chief legal advisor saying, how can you have your people say this in a public hearing? That's like perjury, right? No, crickets, absolute crickets.
Do you think that the recent John Deere union strikes are affecting their public perception in a way that could play a role in future litigation?
I don't. I think they're two very separate and distinct issues. And kind of the culture of John Deere is one very much of, let's call it a turtle. When anybody comes at them, they get behind their hard shell and they hide. When I first started working on this, I thought, I literally used my grandfather's as an excuse to go and talk to a John Deere vice president. And, he was very polite to me he graciously was willing to meet with me and talk to me and those kinds of things. And I thought that was nice. And I thought we'd have an appropriate conversation that really dealt with issues. And when I started to point out to him after we met via email, where his comments weren't truthful, he ghosted me. He just said, I'm not talking to this guy anymore.
And politeness ended.
I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere there's my name on a list. Go, watch out for that guy. He's crazy. He's out to get us. He's going to cause us all kinds of problems and all that kind of stuff. Actually, my intent here is to improve John Deere, to make them a better corporate citizen, not what they're currently doing. I don't want to characterize it.
Well, that ends my questions for today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And where can people find you and your YouTube channel and everything else that you're doing?
Great. So 2 things they can do for me. They can go out to Deere Facts. That's DEERE Facts on YouTube. That's my channel. And I've only got one up right now, but I'll get more up, I promise. And then the other is they can email me at williecade@gmail.com, which is, I understand there'll be a whole lot of people, and there might even be people that think I'm a creep and a badass or whatever. That's fine. Let's have the dialogue. I'm more than willing to do it. And by the way, let's end it with a joke. Okay, Lewis. So why is Deere spelled with 3 E's?
I have no idea.
So they can charge you more money. There we go. All right. Hey, Lewis, thanks.
With that, thank you for watching. And as always, I hope you learned something.
I do too. Thanks, Lewis. Appreciate it.